tried to understand in the previous, in the previous class was the way different scholars or academicians they have tried to understand public policy. So how public policy can be understood, and with that respect, I mentioned to you that Laswell had proposed the cy- cyclical model, meaning that the policy cycle model, right? So policies can be understood as processes where stages follow one after another in a sequence, and once the stages reach from first to the last, then it is understood that a cycle has been completed, and that's what would give us the understanding of the policy. Meaning that this would not simply help in understanding policies only, but at the same time, what policy analysts have understood that this can also be a tool of analysis, right? Tool of analysis. So policy science, at a different level, they are not simply meant to understand government's policies, but the analysts they look at the policies with an aim to, number one, find the gaps in terms of suggesting or recommending improvisation for future policies to the government, right? And number two, policy analysts, by exhibiting this quality or this skill, right, they also draw the attention of the government or policy makers that they have this specific skill, or they have this specific expertise which the government can use, right, either for the formulation of the policy or at a later stage when the policy is being implemented. Meaning that not only this would serve as giving feedback to the government, but at the same time their expertise can also be effectively utilized by the government to make policies better, to meet the objectives in a better manner. So that's what the overall objective is when we are trying to look at such models or such instruments or tools which were explained or given by different scholars or different political thinkers. So as I stated earlier, this is also a tool of analysis, right? This is also an instrument of analysis. So when one is trying to look at the policies. But as I told you, when one looks at Laswell's policy cycle model, then it suggests that it is somehow a linear process, wherein number one, only the government agencies or actors who are part of the government system, they are only involved in the whole process. And number two, the policies they have a start or beginning and an end, right, which was somehow criticized by other policy thinkers, other thinkers who understood that as far as policies are concerned. So, the policies in its state are to be seen as an ongoing process. Because in the understanding of some of the policy analysts or some of the academicians, policies, they may be started by the government, but they never come to an end, right? So either the same policy is continued in a different form by the successive governments, or elements of the policies are incorporated in other policies which may be going on. So that's where Gary Brewer, right? Gary, Gary Brewer, Gary Brewer, right? So he tried to improvise upon the policy cycle model of Laswell. And he understood that instead of the seven stages, policy cycle perhaps can consist of only six stages. And in his understanding, these stages could be understood as something as follows, which I am going to explain now. Number one, there would be invention or initiation. That would be the first stage, right? Invention or initiation. Now, what this means. I will come back to this, right? So first, let me name these six stages given by Gary Brewer. So first, as I told you, in Gary Brewer's understanding, there has to have initiation or invention, right? When one is trying to understand the policies or public policy. The second stage would be estimation, right? Estimation, right? Third, in his understanding, would be the stage of selection. Okay. Fourth, implementation. Fifth, evaluation, right? And then termination. So these are the six stages according to Gary Brewer. Okay, let me repeat. First, invention or initiation. Second, estimation. Third, selection. Fourth, implementation. Fifth, evaluation, and finally termination. Right? Clearer? Okay. Okay, right. So now let's try to understand something about the first stage that Brewer calls as invention or initiation, right? So in Brewer's understanding, every policy has its linkages or it has its association with the way problem would be recognized by the government as significant, which requires a policy intervention, right? So that is where, in Brewer's understanding, first the government would make an endeavor to identify the problem. So now maybe you can try to understand it, with the help of an example, right? Say for instance, corruption in public places, that is a problem, and there is a problem which is known to all, right? But is it that the government would recognize it as a problem significant enough to be addressed through the means of policy intervention at every stage and everywhere, right? This may not be so. Maybe corruption may be at the level of the individual in his individual capacity, say for instance, as a member of family, right? Or as a member of some political group, or as a member of some larger institution of which the individual may be a part. But at what stage the government would consider the problem of corruption significant enough to be addressed through the means of policy intervention? That's what comes at the level of invention or initiation, right? Meaning that the government starts recognizing the problem. But it is not that, according to Gary Brewer, it is not that the government would not start looking at the solutions as well. So this does not happen in his understanding that once problem arises and then the government starts thinking about the solution. So in his understanding, problem and solution, they possibly go hand in hand, right? So problems, they exist, but at the same time, the kind of solution that it may be required, right, to address the problem, that also would be given due consideration by the government simultaneously. So that's what is the stage of initiation or invention, right? Second, estimation. Now that's where, if you recall, I had referred to during my discussion that how government would act as a rational actor. Now estimation would involve what? Therein, possibly government would not only look at the alternatives, which may be an effective means to address the problem which has been recognized and which has been selected by the government, that should be addressed through the means of policy intervention. But at the same time, the government make an estimate of cost and benefit that would be involved by choosing an alternative. So this tells us first that as far as a problem is concerned, there may be more than one way to address the problem, right? So that is where the issue of alternative comes. Number two, how from among the alternatives the government would choose one or more than one or none. So that is where the whole aspect of cost benefit analysis comes into picture. So the government would look at the cost involved by choosing an alternative to address the problem. And number two, what are the likely outcomes which the government would achieve by selecting that particular alternative, right? So that's where selection part.